All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jenna Chouinard, Marketing Consultant for Diamond IT, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and our topic today is cybersecurity threats are real, but so are practical ways to build your defenses. Before we dive in, I want to introduce our panel of experts. We have John Fetrick, VP of Managed Services and Visionary Leader at Diamond IT. Cody Cooper, Service Manager, CISSP and BCISO at Diamond IT, and Bill Kizer, Cyber Intelligence Analyst from the Department of Homeland Security and Central California Intelligence Center. So very excited about this panel. I know they have a lot of valuable insights to share with you all. And please just keep in mind as we go, this webinar will be recorded and emailed after the event for your reference, along with the details regarding your free vulnerability assessment as a thank you for joining us. And lastly, throughout the next hour, please do not hesitate to drop your questions in the Q&A section here in GoToWebinar. I'll be keeping a close eye on that, and we'll make sure to pause and get those answered as we make our way through. But with that being said, I'll hand it over to John to kick us off.
All right, thanks, Jenna, and thanks for everybody to attending. And we appreciate your time today as we work through this, and really just hoping to have a conversation to raise awareness of the threats that are out there, some actions we can take as businesses and organizations, and just some practical steps, and then even some personal practical steps as we go into the holiday season. To just quickly walk through the agenda, we want to take some of Bill's time and expertise and kind of walk through and explain what the Central California Intelligence Center does and the resources they provide. We'll go through inventory and managing risk, some incident response essentials and information on that, security awareness training, and like I said, some personal security tips. Again, for everyone talks about businesses and organizations and entities, but to drive this home to the personal level of how you interact with your bank and things around you, we believe is important just for that personal security hygiene. So I do want to give Bill a minute to introduce himself and what he does with Homeland Security. And Bill, tell us about you and CCIC.
All right, thank you, John. I appreciate the opportunity to come out here and speak today and participate in this panel and talk about cybersecurity. That's always a subject that I always enjoy talking about, either that or my kids. They're both kind of right up there equal. Like we said, my name is Bill Kizer, and I technically work for the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. However, there is a nuance, and so we'll cover that here. Sacramento County Sheriff's Department is a primary fiduciary for an organization called the Central California Intelligence Center. CCIC is actually part of Department of Homeland Security. We are a fusion center. Fusion centers were set up after 9/11 to help communicate information regarding terrorism from the federal level down to a state level or local level, counties, all the way down to the lowest level within the organizations. And over the years, it went from primarily about terrorism and law enforcement to start to include cybersecurity. So now, as part of the Fusion Center, we have one of the teams within the Fusion Center is our cybersecurity team. And what we do is we go out and help state, local, tribal, territorial, SLTT, public entities basically work on their cybersecurity programs. We offer cyber assessments. We do a lot of discussions, a lot of trainings. We do a lot of these, like these webinars. We do all kinds of fun things. Oh, I guess tabletop exercises is one of our latest thing that we've been having a blast doing. This slide here kind of gives a quick overview because everybody gets so confused as to the hierarchy. Where is everything? Because you hear that you've got FBI, you got CISA, you may have even have heard of CalSIC if you're here in California. And we get this question all the time, like, who are you guys? Why are you here? So this slide, it does a decent overview of the main organizations that deal with a lot of cybersecurity risks throughout the nation and California. So at the top, we have CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and they are responsible at a national level. So they do all things national, and they feed us information, and then that will trickle down to the California Cybersecurity Integration Center, or CalSIC. CalSIC is responsible for cybersecurity at the state level. So if a state entity unfortunately gets breached or ransomware, they're the primary investigative agency that handles that. Plus, there is a California directive that says that certain entities, especially like schools, now have to report breaches to the CalCIC for investigation and tracking. So then at the bottom level here, and I always hate to say it, the low man on the totem pole, but we are the lowest in the fact that CCIC handles everything at the local level. So we like to be the boots on the ground. We are the guys that if there's an incident or you need questions, you can call me up and just say, hey, Bill, this is who I am, and I've attended one of your presentations or whatever it was, however you got my number. We will come out, we will see you, we will meet with you, we will discuss all things cybersecurity. So we like to have that very close relationship with all of the people in our area of responsibility. Now, speaking of area of responsibility, there are 5 fusion centers throughout California, and CCIC is responsible for 34 of the 58 counties within California. We go everywhere from Kern County up to the Oregon state line, and we go from kind of the Bay Area. We don't go to the water, unfortunately, but we just go east of the Bay Area, so East Bay, all the way over to Nevada state line. So if you're really good at visualization, there's a whole swath of central, northeastern, north, anyway. So yes, we are responsible for 34 counties, and we just like to get out and obviously talk about cybersecurity.
So CCIC has a lot of resources at their disposal. Being part of all of this, this is particular to California, are there other similar organizations that are a mouthful of letters throughout the country and to provide similar resources if you're outside of California?
There are actually 80 fusion centers throughout the United States, and like I said, 5 of them here in California. So that gives you 75 other fusion centers that you can go talk to, and every state has at least 1 fusion center. Well, California is so large that we're lucky we get to have 5 within. So yes, every state does have a fusion center and essentially does the same things.
Okay, so for those of you that are attending that may not be in California, we can help connect you if necessary to get access to these resources with your local fusion center. So we just wanted to make sure it's not just a California thing, it's a national thing.
Definitely.
So as we dive into this, as of course I've flipped the slides a couple times because I can't work PowerPoint well, but the what we want to dive into here is how do you know where your risk is? And we hear people talking about risk and you got to manage it, but what does that really mean? So, you know, Cody, you've worked with a lot of organizations, varying complexities. Can you kind of walk through how we identify that, or what is the important process to go to start with to begin managing your risk?
Absolutely. I think first it's important to remember that risk can be both a financial risk, it can be a public relations risk, a personnel risk, a privacy risk. So there's all kinds of different types of what we call risk. And within that risk, you have the idea of security, in this instance, cybersecurity, to protect that risk. The biggest thing that you will hear anyone who's done this for a while tell you is if you don't know what you're protecting, you can't protect it, right? So when it comes to a risk, the very first thing you're going to hear is, do you know what assets you have? Do you know what machines you have? And John, I don't want to get super distracted into story time, but to really drive this point home, I'm going to go ahead and go into a story. So I got a phone call earlier this summer for a client who they were hit by ransomware. They had never worked with us before, and they didn't know what was going on, and they asked us to come on site. So we went on site and we remediated the ransomware, and we were able to essentially get them back up and running. But the problem that they ran into is the ransomware came back. It kept coming back, and they couldn't figure out why. And it turns out that they had another server they weren't aware of. Even though the users were logging into that server every day and actually using that server, they thought it belonged on a different box under someone's desk. And they didn't realize they had 2 separate servers. So if you don't know what you're protecting, how can you possibly protect it, right? So a few key things. I would highly suggest we have an inventory of all of our cybersecurity assets, all of your switches, your routers, your firewalls, your machines. but then go one layer deeper and ask yourself, where is your company information? Where is your payroll stored? Where is your whatever data you have, if you have intellectual property, et cetera? If those are on those machines or not, they are still an asset. They're still considered an asset. So knowing all of those things and asking yourself, is there anything else I'm missing? So the last thing I'll drive home is Facebook selling, are they selling a website or are they selling data? Is that how they make their money? And so if someone else takes that data, regardless of whether or not that data can be resold again, their PR has taken such a horrible hit, you're not going to get new users anymore. So there's all different kinds of things to consider. At the end of the day, you have to decide, once you've identified your risk, are you going to accept that risk, or are you going to try and mitigate the risk by using something like security to improve that mitigation? What you don't want to do is guess, and it's in the slides here too to sort of drive the point home, and I wrote it in all caps at the time. Don't guess about how much money you should spend on security. Figure out roughly how much you are losing every year in an incident, or if an incident were to happen, say how much it would cost you over 5 years, and then figure out the security to use on that to sort of figure out what makes the most sense. You don't need to go crazy with it.
So as organizations go to manage this, Bill, you work with a lot of different organizations. What are some commonalities you see in those that have put together a successful program to kind of give people an idea of where to start or what does good look like?
First, I'll echo a couple of things that Cody was just saying. And if you, anyway, are the techno nerd type and you look at the CIS controls, which is the layout of how you can approach cybersecurity, CIS control number one is know your assets, know your hardware, because you can't protect what you don't know. And that's exactly what Cody was saying. And just recently, we were out on doing an assessment, and it's always fun because whenever my colleague and I go out, we always ask the basic questions because after a while, we just want to have a little bit of fun. And so we always ask, well, how many XP machines do you have? And people, oh, no, we don't have any XP machines. So now we're starting to ask about Windows 7 machines. How many Windows 7 machines do you have? Oh, no, we've only got 5, and it's amazing how much we can find. For instance, we were doing an assessment, and I actually came across, as looking at this, and we got an alert saying that this organization was running MongoDB. And I've never seen MongoDB in the wild before. I've read about it, I've heard about it, I've wanted to tinker with it. And I was like, wow, you guys are running Mongo. And the IT manager was just like, well, I don't even know what that is. And so we were like, well, here it is, and this is the machine it's running on, and it's seriously out of date. So you have a huge vulnerability risk in Mongo. And he had no idea what that was or why they were running it. So when we gave him the IP address of the machine, he looked it up in their asset inventory, found out what it was, and it's a vended product that was using Mongo on the back end instead of something like SQLite. So he made a phone call, and was on the phone with the vendor saying, hey, we have this serious issue. And within 20 minutes of us finding that risk or that vulnerability, he was on the phone trying to get remedied because Mongo is so far out of date. So anyway, not to dig down too deep into the story time rabbit hole, which, it's funny because I'm getting older, and so my whole life is war stories. So I can tell war stories all day.
Yep.
But for your question, like what you were saying is, what are we seeing in the commonalities? Well, we see a lot of ransomware, obviously, and we see other things in our area of responsibility. But the biggest thing is the incident response plans, disaster recovery plans, business continuity plans. The organizations that have an incident response plan or a disaster recovery plan, and they've run it through a tabletop exercise, they know it, they know exactly where it's at, they seem to be more successful and quicker at recovery from an incident than those without.
And that's a great place to start, and we'll get into that a little deeper in just a bit here. But something I did want to touch on is there's a lot of product out there and flashy marketing and millions of dollars poured into some buzzwords. And Cody, what are we seeing out there, and what are you seeing specifically targeting our clients and businesses in general?
Yeah, AI, artificial intelligence is the name of the game, right? Everyone's talking about it. You've got Chat GPT, you've got artificial intelligence making pictures and drawings now. It can impersonate you via your voice. So of course, use that same automation for security. It makes sense, right? The problem you're going to run into with that is a machine only knows what we've told it, right? And we tell it, hey, look out for these things that involve security and involve malware. Well, if something comes in that the machine or that AI isn't looking for or doesn't know about, it's just as susceptible as anything else. So don't think I have AI protecting me or I have this or that protecting me that you're going to be invulnerable. I like to describe cybersecurity as a layer of onions, or if you want to use an older example, a castle, you have moats and walls and drawbridges. You have all these things to stop it, right? If you rely on a single product, you're probably going to have a bad time. But to the buzzword sense, if you rely on something like that that tells you it's going to do it all, if something does it all, it does all of it probably a little poorly.
Yeah, I always like to say, and Cody's heard me say this in meetings with him, of if you go to a restaurant and they have a 42-page menu, none of it's probably that good. But the place with a one-pager at 10 things, they're probably all excellent. So
Yes.
being able to stay focused on what you're good at and not claiming to do everything, and it's similar to an approach we have of we're good at this and we will bring in other folks and partnerships to fill gaps.
Absolutely. Yep.
So Bill, your story on the Mondo and patch management is such a key piece of this that we wanted to touch on it today. Can you speak to understanding like what is patch management and why is it so important, and how can we begin to get our arms around it?
That is tough. Every organization that we go to and work with, patch management is always difficult. Trying to keep up on all of the vended software just so you know what you have and what needs to be patched, and does this patch break something else, or if you have a customer application, you have to know all of this information. So you have to do a lot of research before you can tilt up some kind of an automated process. So what we see throughout is, as we do our assessments and write up our reports, that says, hey, you have this many vulnerabilities or critical or high vulnerabilities, and let's say it's a Microsoft patch and you've got 75 machines that need this Microsoft patch. Those seem to be fairly easy to deal with because people are running their patch what WSUS and there's another one I can't think of off the top of my head. It's the Microsoft server, which everything reports to and says, hey, I need this patch, and it's sent out. So the Microsoft patches are easy, but what about Adobe? We see vulnerabilities all the time, and I hate to pick on a single product, but it always seems like Adobe is one of those that we see. So how do you push out a patch to those? You have to queue it up, you have to write a package, you have to send it out. You almost need a specialized person to do this. The other, within all of our assessments that we see, is a lot of Apache. So people are running Apache servers out there, and Apache releases a lot of patches as well. So it's easy to fall behind. And every time you fall behind on a patch, there's that creates that vulnerability. So, and that goes back to our original topic about risk. So now you've got this risk, and like Cody's saying, you have to either mitigate the risk or you have to accept the risk. And so through patch management is a way that you can minimize that risk, but trying to stay up on like, okay, well, this application uses this version of Apache, this application, what are we going to break? And having a relationship with your vendors that fully understand and bless the patching process, that's difficult. And like I said, it's a lot of these organizations that we work with, they either have a full-time person or they seem to have nobody that does it. And obviously those that have nobody are highest risk, more vulnerabilities. It's kind of piecemealed, and Microsoft comes out with a 0 day. Just yesterday, we got alerts blown up. In fact, right when I was before the webinar, I was working on a spreadsheet of over 100,000 entities in California that are susceptible to a new 0-day from Cisco. So right now, the 5 fusion centers are scrambling to put together this list to contact people within our AOR to say, hey, you might be vulnerable to this 0-day Cisco. So how do you patch that? You have to have somebody that knows your Cisco environment. You have to have a network engineer, somebody that's going to apply that patch and possibly take down a route on a router. So there's a lot of that risk as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned Apache, and that just hit home for me because I've had a lot of client environments over the years where the printer uses an Apache web server and you have no idea it even exists. And are you on top of your print vendors to make sure that's being patched or scanning your network appropriately, or that, a lot of these third party and other devices run Apache as their web server just for management. So keeping track of that is definitely a challenge. And Cody, how do you, third-party software has always been an issue. Windows is easy. There's many different ways to kind of patch and report against that with WSUS, with various other patching tools. And System Center was out there and all of that. What are some strategies you have today to address the third-party issue?
Yeah, so there are, like you said, John, there are tools you can use. The tool route is difficult because you don't always have the budget, particularly if you're a smaller business. And sometimes the tools, they can make your life easier if you know how to use them, but the tools themselves may not be user-friendly. So just because you have a tool and you say installed it on everything doesn't necessarily mean it's set up right, doesn't mean all the patching is working correctly, that kind of thing. And to Bill's point earlier, you don't know what you're going to break. There's a community online, and I hate to use this example, but it's a really good one. It's a community of system administrators on a website called Reddit. And within there's a gentleman who has a fleet of 6,000 computers. And every Patch Tuesday, he will make a post and he will send that patch out to all 6,000 of his machines. And the rest of the internet waits for him to say what breaks. And then everyone else goes in and updates their machines, right? You shouldn't operate that way. You should probably read the actual article from Microsoft. But to Bill's point, it can break things. So what we are starting to see is a shift in thought process from let's install everything everywhere to something called attack surface reduction, where the idea is actually to have fewer things installed, fewer things on your machines, particularly on your servers, that don't really need to be there. And by having good hygiene and having fewer things on your machines, there's less you need to patch, there's less you need to document, to Bill's point, that you have to worry about. So between having a good, robust set of tools that are affordable and set up correctly, and having a small surface, attack surface, so you don't have as much to target, you can help reduce that risk and stay up to date on your patching as much as possible.
Got it. That makes sense completely. So I do want to make sure we roll forward here. I could talk about patch management and ways to mitigate for it. Yeah. It's nerd. It gets excited about that. But Bill had mentioned incident response and disaster recovery. And I think, once you understand your risk and have identified like the crown jewels of your business and things you need to take care of and have that inventory, we need to start in the industry. You may hear the term or see it written about of to the right of boom. So to the left of boom is all the things you're doing to mitigate that risk and identify, and then boom happens, inevitably ransomware attack, a business email compromise, something. And then what do you do after that? And that's when kind of IR comes into play and DR and business continuity. And there's confusion around which one is like, what do these terms mean? So, Cody, could you kind of help clarify like incident response versus disaster recovery?
Absolutely. First off, if you do find yourself in that boom situation, I highly recommend getting some coffee. It's going to be a long day, and I hope you're ready. So incident response is, I think sometimes everyone likes to talk about incident response because it's sort of the actionable thing you can do, right? It's sort of, you're in the weeds, you're fighting the bad guys, so to speak. Everything that you've done up to that boom is what's going to set your success in the moment. So I just want to be clear on that ahead of time. So incident response, having that plan is great, but if you haven't read it, if you haven't practiced it, if you haven't done, I'm getting off my soapbox here, but if you haven't done those things, you're going to struggle. But when we talk about incident response, what we're mostly talking about is a cybersecurity attack and how to respond to that kind of thing, how to mitigate it, quarantine it, and eventually recover from it. But that is a very narrow definition, because you have something called disaster recovery, which is how do you recover your entire business? And it's not just in the moment, but it's the say 48 hours to week after that, where you're trying to recover from anything at all. It could be an earthquake, a flood, a power outage, any kind of disaster. It's not just cybersecurity. So it's important to throw that out there. And then in particular, disaster recovery is simply recovering from something that happened. It's not necessarily responding to a cybersecurity incident and trying to stop the incident. So a good example that I like to give that is not necessarily cybersecurity related, we have a backup service that we use called Acronis, and shout out to them, they're great. We had a client call us and they didn't actually have a cybersecurity incident. Instead, they had a disaster situation. There's all of their servers or domain controllers. They just started getting corrupted suddenly out of nowhere. It looked like a cybersecurity incident at first, so we got the phone call. We thought it was ransomware. It wasn't. It turns out there was some corruption, and it just locked everyone out of their machines. Almost imagine your way of authenticating and typing in your password was just gone suddenly out of nowhere for the whole company. So no one could log in. And so we had to do disaster recovery. Now, that's not an incident response in the cybersecurity sense. That is more of a disaster recovery. We had to recover 4 different servers, 2 domain controllers, everything from backup, reassociate those domain controllers with the ones that weren't hit, that hadn't synced correct. We had to repair all this stuff. And by using our backup software, Acronis, and all of that, we were able to get everything back up and running within that weekend. But it's a very different situation. You take similar steps, but disaster recovery and incident response can be very different.
Yeah, and you used a lot of technical terms there. I'd like to just bring out that incident response and disaster recovery aren't just technical responses to things. Yes. So as you create your plan, you need to consider, do we need, who's my lawyer? Who do I call? Because this is now a legal thing. And depending on the organization or business, you should probably have a PR firm on retainer. Who do we call for insurance? And what are those next steps? Because when that boom happens is not the time to figure that out. You need those points of contact and the playbook set up. So it's not a lot of folks think that this is just a technical, I'm getting my backups or I'm wiping machines and reloading. There's a lot more that kind of goes into that you got to think outside of the tech, that this is really business impacting and how do we solve that for the good of the business.
John, I want to interrupt real quick and hammer that point home. We responded to a city that had ransomware 2 years ago, and the very first person who was inundated with phone calls was the secretary at the front desk, and she didn't know what to say. And so having even just a small script goes a long way for controlling public image.
Yep, and just knowing what to do and putting your people in a bad position.
Exactly.
Because they don't know how to respond, and mistakes can get made or misinterpreted, and that's not good for anybody. And I know the CCIC does a lot of work with this, Bill. How can you help with this, and how are you helping organizations today develop these plans?
So just because, like I said a few minutes ago, I like to tell war stories. It's a good way to communicate a lot of ideas pretty quickly. So we'll start off with a couple war stories, and I will somehow roundabout make my way into how does CCIC help. But so the first war story that we have is that there was a community college within the Central Valley that got hit by ransomware. And the first thing they did, which was perfectly fine, well, maybe it wasn't the first thing, but one of the early steps was they called me and they said, hey, Bill, we just got hit by ransomware. We need some help. Call me at this number. And they left me the phone number. And when I tried to call them back, it was their VoIP phones. And the IT director didn't really associate the ransomware with taking the VoIP system down. So he did not leave any other way for me to communicate with him. So unfortunately, as hard as I tried to call, since their whole VoIP system, they were absolutely down, I couldn't get a hold of this director. So I started getting creative and looking at other things, and their website was completely gone. Everything was completely gone because they were hosting their own DNS and everything else, and the threat actor got in and just wiped everything out essentially. So what they did was they set up a new Twitter account, and they were using Twitter to communicate with the students at the community college and the staff. And I distinctly remember they put out a tweet that said, at all staff, if you want to get paid this week, you need to come onto campus to building 4, classroom 3, or whatever it was, and you need to bring such and such form with you and your last pay stub so that we can figure out your paycheck manually. So I have this vision of a lot of people sitting around in a classroom with calculators and their staff standing in line with whatever the form was and their last paycheck, trying to figure out what are my taxes that I've got to, how much am I paid per hour, or whatever their pay rate was. And I thought, wow, that is brutal. That is just absolutely brutal, because if you think of a community college, you've got hundreds of staff that you're trying to communicate with. You're trying to manually process and print or write out checks and everything else to get your staff paid. So when I look at that and I think of business continuity, of how am I going to keep my business running during whatever the incident is, and as Cody has been saying, it doesn't even necessarily need to be a cyber event. It could be, we live in California, it could be earthquake, fire, locusts. It seems like, all the plagues are starting to hit us. So how do you continue conducting your business and recover from this incident at the same time? And to me, when I don't think that manual paychecks and having teachers bring in their last pay stub is necessarily a valid business continuity plan, but it's what they had to do in the meantime. So yes, they were still able to pay teachers, but it was laborious. So on the flip side of that, we worked with another city within the Central Valley, and we did a tabletop exercise with them almost a year ago now. And we went through their incident response plan and their disaster recovery plan in this tabletop exercise. They had all the city administrators there, all the heads of the different departments. And I believe, Cody, you talked about, it's not just a technical thing. You have to get the right players in the room to have these conversations, because I'll tell you, it's interesting working on an incident response plan or a disaster recovery plan, because the first question you end up asking is, whose stuff is most important, and who do we have to get online first? And Department of Finance always says, me, I have to be able to pay bills. Law and Justice, me, I have to be able to arrest people or cite people. Fire's like, well, we got to respond. Sewer or water treatment. And when you really start to think about it, you go, oh my gosh, for a city, what is the most important thing for them to be able to do? And so we went through this whole exercise, this tabletop on the incident response, and we did that in December, and then in February they got hit by ransomware. And this incident response was so fresh in everybody's mind that they knew exactly what to do. So they ran as soon as they found out that they were under attack, as part of their incident response plan. And Cody talked about isolation. The first thing they did was based off of the tabletop exercise, they had the city network, which then reached out to Law and Justice or to the police department, and they replaced the cable between the two networks with a bright red or pink cable. And their incident response was, if we get hit or they get hit, you go and you yank all the red cables. Just pull them out, and that will help with your isolation. I think that's a fabulous idea, as long as somebody has keys to the closet where all of this is. And we discussed that in the planning process as well, as to who has the keys. And so the facilities guy held up this big old wad of keys and was like, I've got them. And it's like, great. Are you on vacation ever? Anyway, so they exercised that, and they went and they started yanking these red cables out of all their switches, which isolated the problem. And because they had been through the incident response, the disaster recovery, and the business continuity plans just recently, and everybody knew, they had binders, and we always refer to them as the red binder on the shelf. Know where that red binder is. They went, they grabbed that, and they started to implement their plan. And within 4 hours of them being hit, they had complete containment and they were starting to rebuild. They had called their cyber insurance. Cyber insurance has sent out an incident response team. They validated the backups were good, and that's a huge portion of any kind of disaster recovery plan, is making sure those backups are good. So an independent company validated the backups, said, yes, these are good. There's no ransomware. There's no threat actor on these. And they were able to start to restore from backups. But a 4-hour starting to implement recovery versus the other one that I said where they were sending out tweets, huge difference because of their planning. And you said something about it, John, which kind of cracks me up, is left and right of boom. Because when I first started with CCIC, I've been there just over 2 years now. Everybody always referred as left of boom, and me being, I guess, slower than some other people, I don't know. It took me a long time to figure out what that actually meant, but that is part of our motto. We want to be left of boom. So almost everything that CCIC does is to help prepare for that incident. And how does CCIC help with this incident response, disaster recovery, business continuity? We can hunt down templates. We will work with agencies or entities. We will go through a thought exercise with them. We won't actually write the incident response because that is, it's not personal, but it is very business centric, and that's what they've got to have those conversations. But we'll participate in the conversations. We just this past week we had a school district ask us for an incident response plan for schools. So we reached out to another one of our partner agencies, which is another school, and said, hey, do you have? They said, sure. They sent it right over. We forwarded it on. We did our Fusion Center task of disseminating information. And now we're helping that other school district write their incident response plan based off of one that we know is solid and works well. So we always reach out. We always work with people, talk to people about these things, and we will run through tabletops to help whatever entity flush out the weaknesses.
Yeah.
And
Bill,
not to keep going on. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to point out 4 hours is extremely rare. Just for the audience to understand, 4 hours is almost unheard of in a recovery situation.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. You know, living in this situation, I always think, yeah, everybody knows, but yeah, there's, and not to be too much on story time, but another entity that we were helping, they wrote their incident response plan. We went through a tabletop, and they didn't think about their incident response plan when we went through the tabletop. So when we did the tabletop, we started talking, and it's like, okay, we're incident response, disaster recovery. And the team that we were working with knew that they had it, but it was so fresh in their mind that we sat there for 20 minutes letting everybody kind of flounder. And finally I said, hey, do you guys have a incident response plan? And they went, oh yeah, where is it? And so they had to go running down the hallway to find the red binder. But anyway.
So it's back to knowing your assets and knowing what you have, and that's one of them is the red binder.
Exactly. It all loops around eventually.
and with IR and disaster recovery, something, you know, when things happen, because it's not a matter of if, something will happen. And if you need to engage with insurance, please remember, check with your insurance provider that you may not want to start recovering right away until they bless that recovery and say it's okay, or you could invalidate your policy. So as you work through that and the planning, the notification to them if you need to involve them, we've had clients, or they are the clients now, where they ran through this process and a provider or their IT team immediately began recovering from backup in a security incident, which then caused no payout from insurance, no help from insurance, because they didn't validate it and couldn't do the forensics on it, because they didn't preserve the data. So there's a lot of steps to think through. Talk to someone if you're going through these plans. Engage with Bill or engage with somebody with expertise in that area. And if you, this isn't a plug for Diamond, but if we don't have the expertise, reach out to us and we'll find someone that can help you if it's something we can't do, because this is important and it's very detailed. So. PowerPoint. So lastly, and don't want to rush through this because this is a big deal. and I want to be conscious of the time here, but security awareness training, we've gone through organizational risk and management and patching of resources, and we haven't really talked about the people. So to the castle analogy, you know, you have moats and you have walls and you have archers on the walls, but if the, you know, the town baker opens the front door, none of that does any good. So can you speak to the importance of this and what you've seen out there, Cody?
Yes, so there's at this moment I believe the last I heard it was around 200 or 300 million hack going on, and the ramifications of this hack is continuing as more information is coming out. For those of you who are not aware, a few months ago, MGM Casino and Resort Hotel chain was hit. And what's funny about this situation, and I'm going to pick on them because it's in the news. What's funny about the situation is I was in Vegas a year ago with Diamond IT. Shout out to Diamond for the trip. And I was standing in the lobby of a casino with two of my senior engineers. And we were watching them as they were working on the ATM, and the ATM had crashed and it was booting up Windows 7, Bill. And we're watching this situation unfold as there's a guy there pushing buttons, trying to get this Windows 7 machine to go back into the ATM screen, right? And I'm thinking, wow, if this is a security for everything else, I'm concerned, right? So when I saw the news article about MGM, I was not surprised. It wasn't MGM. That was not the hotel we were at. But for those of you who are not aware, so security awareness training is where you train your end users to just be aware of cybersecurity threats that could happen via social engineering, where you try and trick someone. Maybe you impersonate someone else. Maybe you do an email or a phone call that makes the other person on the end of the line give you either too much information or something that they just aren't supposed to have or know. That is how MGM was breached, a billion-dollar company with a larger budget in cybersecurity than I think most cities can afford. And they were still hacked by a group we suspect here in the United States. Because what they did is they picked up the phone and they just called people. And they just kept calling random people until eventually they found someone who gave them their password. And this person, as far as we can tell, was a super user, meaning an administrator of some sort in the system. And from there, they were just able to traverse into the rest of the network. They took down the room keys, so none of the guests could get in their rooms. Bill, to your payroll point, they had to manually walk every single guest to their room and open the door for them because the key card machines were down. Some of the slot machines were down, so there's a loss in revenue. And most importantly, MGM did not announce that they were breached. Instead, the hackers announced it for them because MGM kept downplaying what happened. So the hackers went on Twitter and said, no, this is what happened. They're called Scattered Spiders, the name of the group. And they explained what happened because MGM refused to do so. And that's how the majority of people found out that their information had been compromised. So, excuse me. So when it comes to security awareness training, had the people been properly trained on what to look for, those Nigerian prince emails as an example, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And if it sounds too easy, maybe double check, right? Is really what it boils down to at the end of the day for security awareness training. It is by far, besides knowing your assets, it is by far the most crucial piece to cybersecurity, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that the easy part of that, not the easy part, is to train, you know, if someone calls you asking for information, say thank you, let me call you back, and then go find the phone number of that place. And that goes to the personal security, which we want to get into here real quick before we end the webinar here. So as we're coming into the holiday season, you know, we've talked about mitigating risk and patching and all the stuff we've talked about today. But, you know, Bill, what are some tips you can think of for us and everybody, the public in general, for personal cybersecurity hygiene and out there in the wild? We see attacks and scams and everything go through the roof in November and December. So it's very timely. And Bill, what do you see out there? And what are a couple things people can do to protect themselves?
So I'll step back 1 second and reiterate on the security awareness training. One of the biggest values that we see within our AOR is phishing campaigns. So there are a lot of really good companies out there that will help you put together phishing campaigns and test your employees. Test them and see, are you clicking on this email that could be nefarious? Could this be scraping something, or could it be downloading? So we see, and that's one of our big recommendations, is start with your users, start with the phishing campaigns, And then also, since this is October, put up your posters that say, hey, be mindful of security and such. We see those all over in the county. But as far as personal security tips and such, the thing, this is almost ingenious, and it's kind of an interesting thing. As you're going out and you like here in Sacramento, we have to pay for parking all over the place, and everything is moving away from the old school, drop your quarters into the meter. And now it's scan the QR code, log into this website, put in your credit card information. Well, we're seeing scammers go and paste a new QR code over the sign, and that QR code takes you to the threat actor's login page, and you don't think anything different. You go, oh, this looks like the sign that's right here, you know, like parkfortheday.com or whatever it is, and it looks just like the sign. It's got the same colors, it's got everything else. Maybe the URL is just a little bit different, but still, you scan the QR code, you punch in your credit card information, and you don't realize that you're just handing that off to a scammer or a hacker or whatever it is. So we see that a lot, and especially this right now, like you say, people are starting to get out, they're thinking of a holiday, and you wouldn't think that necessarily that a QR code could be nefarious, but we're starting to see an uptick in that. And also, obviously, it's you kind of alluded to it too, John, is that if somebody calls you, you know, your bank calls you or sends you a text and says, hey, we think your account's been compromised, what is your bank account password? You know, be mindful of who you're giving that information out to. Don't obviously ever give out a password, or don't give out your credentials. And you alluded to it, saying, I'll look up the number. So if it's Wells Fargo, I'm going to look up the number, as opposed to Wells Fargo calling me or asking me questions, sending me a text message. I'm going to go on to Wells Fargo site and look at the phone number and call them directly. So those are two super simple things that we can do that are going to help keep us safer online, help us, especially with our purchasing, because nobody wants to deal with a compromised credit card in the beginning of December and then say, have your credit card company say it's going to take us 10 days to get you a new credit card. It's tough.
Yeah, Cody, do you have any insights there?
I can tell you, Bill, my favorite phishing campaign to send out in December is an Amazon shipping tracking email, because every single person is mailing presents in December, and I can get half an organization to respond to those phishing emails. So keep that in mind. Yes, easily. What I would suggest is two things. The first one is be mindful of what you put on social media. Be mindful of the things you share, such as, say, your maiden name or the names of your children and stuff like that, because those are often what people use in their passwords. And there's been numerous breaches, both personally and professionally, of people I know, because someone was able to guess via social media what their password was. Just be mindful of that, birthday dates, etc. And also consider your title on LinkedIn. If your title suggests that you have access to something, I promise you will be found and you will be targeted. I know how many failed login attempts I have on my email accounts for me personally, and they're in the hundreds every 24 hours. I know people know who I am and they target me, right? So something that I would encourage you to do to keep your whole family safe is consider a tool like a password manager. That way you have something that you can share securely with your other family members. Your wife or your husband wants the Netflix password because they're traveling, they can log into the password manager and see those passwords, and you don't have to share them in some unsecure way. And if someone forgets a password, they can just auto-generate something semi-complicated, right, to keep you safe. It's a good way to share amongst family members, or maybe even a small business for that matter. So little tips like that. And then my last suggestion is, think of the websites you visit. If the website's not something you've heard of that's asking for your credit card information, double check it, maybe Google it first, see if anyone else has ever used it, look up reviews, etc. Don't fall for fake websites. They're extremely easy to make.
Well, thanks for that. And I think we're out of time, unfortunately. I mean, I know we could keep going on all of this, but I did want to thank everybody for showing up today, and hopefully you learned something and have a good takeaway, and I'll turn it over to Jenna.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Bill, Cody, John. We can't thank you enough for diving in, helping educate us on such an important topic. If anyone does have any questions for our panel, now is the final chance to put them in the Q&A section. But as we start to conclude here, just another reminder to be on the lookout for an email from Diamond IT by the end of the week with this webinar recording and details regarding your free vulnerability assessment. It really is the perfect time to reassess and identify any gaps in your environment, not just because it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, but because it's become so critical to have cybersecurity front of mind in today's world. So you'll see the email address here on the next slide for any other questions or cybersecurity needs that you might have, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And it looks like we do actually have just one question, so I'll go ahead and open this up to any of our experts here. Would you say there's a specific industry or business size that's being hit with ransomware more than others?
I'll venture my toe into that deep pool. Within our AOR right now, we are actually seeing a lot more school districts that are starting to get hit. School districts are vulnerable because they have no money. They are trying to cobble together a cybersecurity program with whoever they can and whatever resources they have. So we see a lot of schools that are struggling with it right now, and smaller cities or entities.
I would say from a business perspective, I hear a lot as I meet with clients, and Cody can probably he'll back me up on this, of I'm too small, I don't matter. And that it couldn't be further from the truth. The smaller you are, it is very apparent that you likely don't have the budget to continue on or to invest into cybersecurity. And bad actors and threat actors will know that these are the targets. And I always think back to Target, the corporation Target, when they had their big breach, it was through a small HVAC company that got on their network, because Target had great security, but their third-party tracking and the vendor security, they were lacking a little bit, but it was the vendor that got breached. And so I always ask my clients questions of, who do you do business with? And we have small suppliers that do Department of Defense work. Well, they're definitely targets. They make a part of who are you doing business with, the United States government. You're definitely a target. So I would say everybody's at risk and everybody is a target. And a lot of attacks we're seeing are almost spray and pray in some sense. And then we're seeing some very targeted ones as well. And it's just, again, it's not a matter of if, it's when, and focusing on those things to the left of boom to mitigate your risk, or to have a plan in place that is tested, are the things you can do to defend against that. But it's rampant and it's everywhere. And I'm not trying to scare people. It's just kind of, unfortunately, a fact of the world that we're living in nowadays.
Well, there's this misconception that if I'm small, I don't have a lot of money, so why would they go after me, right? You can't get a ransom from me. But what's happening, at least in the for-profit sector with businesses, is you're required to have cybersecurity insurance now in some states. So hackers know that. They may not know the financials behind the small HVAC company, but they either know A, they provide services to someone bigger, or B, they have a cybersecurity insurance plan that will pay out a ransom, hopefully. It's the attacker's mindset. So even though you're small, that is not going to stop anyone. Don't fall for that misconception.
Well, not to go into story more, but I had a client in Michigan that they were breached and didn't know about it for quite some time. And so they had threat actors going through their environment, looking at documents, that when they were starting the ransomware, they triggered that and started the negotiation. The question was, we don't have any money and we don't have insurance. And then the hackers sent them their insurance policy and said, actually you do, and you're worth, X million dollars. And so, like, these things happen.
Yeah, we see that a lot within the area, saying that exact scenario, John, where a threat actor gets on there and they do the research. It's funny because before I started getting into this as much as I am, I didn't think that ransomware threat actors were all that sophisticated, but the more I dig in, the more I realize that they do their homework. They do better homework than what I do, in that they research companies. They know how much their net worth is. They know who the CEOs are. They know everything. And especially if they're already on the network, they're digging for their incident response plan because they want to see what that playbook looks like. They're looking at financials. They're looking payroll. They're looking at all that. and they know exactly how much they aren't going to hit my company and say, hey, I want $1 million from you, Bill, because they know that my company is only worth $10,000. So they know. So that's a good point, John.
Yeah, the idea that these folks perpetrating the attacks or, the guy in a hoodie acting alone is it doesn't happen anymore. This is big business, and it is a business. And so they're here to produce money in a repeatable way. The same thing reputable businesses and organizations are trying to do. It's just on the other side of the law, for sure.
Okay, great points. Thank you. Looks like that was our only question. So again, another huge thanks to Bill, Cody, John, everyone who had a chance to join us today. We'll give everyone a couple of minutes back to your day, but stay tuned for more Diamond IT webinars and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.